Yeah, I think that all of us expressing what we were here to express makes it worth being here, you know? And if we're not expressing who we are, then it's still a play, it's still a presentation, but it's not, it's just not so fun to be here if my ladder is leaned on a different house, you know? It's like, if it's leaning in the direction that has me be able to show up and serve and be expressed and feel, then I'm in. And I actually think the sensation in our bodies of inquiry and going within, I think that also counters patriarchy, because patriarchy is so out of body. You know, it's very head at best.
Yeah.
I love being in the head, but
it has its role.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a filter or a sieve or something, you know?
You know what I really wanted to do? I don't know. It's just going to take too much time, and I'll have like 7,000 questions for everyone. But I wanted to go through your albums and be like, what was the sort of catalyst and lesson with each of them? But I don't know if let's just go with the last one. Let's just go with Such Pretty Forks in the Road. So why? Because you don't write albums like on a yearly basis or every other year. It takes a while before I get my music from you.
I'm going to look at that. I'm going to really look at that.
No. It's all right on time. And it all is coming from such an organic place, which I think is why you've stood the test of time and why you have such dedicated devotee fans like myself, because it's authentic and you can't rush that, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just got to be natural and flow. So what brought this one on?
This one was Postpartum. I started it in Malibu with Onyx. And I mean, I think of the song Losing the Plot and Diagnosis as me just going, okay, so I feel really pathologized. I feel, everything about postpartum, unless someone's experienced it, it's a tough one to explain. I mean, depression and anxiety it's just become more ubiquitous now. So people have a general sense of what you mean when you say depressed or anxious. Postpartum in general have whole other elements to it of these invasive thoughts, and they're terrifying, So it's, I needed to write to tell the truth about my experience after having given birth to Onyx, my daughter. And then I kept going, and there was the disillusionment with, okay, I'm not a 21-year-old in Hollywood anymore. What does that mean? Why am I here? Am I going to try and look 21 for the rest of my life? Probably not. I mean, clearly not. And yeah, these songs some of them were retrospective. So some of them were about traumas, sexual abuse, healing traumas. And then some of it was my relationship with Los Angeles. Some of it was a real identity crisis of spiritually, I know that a lot of times a spiritual turning point for people is like you said earlier, when you're kind of alchemically ground into something challenging. Although I've learned a lot of things with ease as well. So I want to give a moment to the idea that we can learn things not just through hardship too.
Fair, totally fair.
But yeah, is there any song on there that you want me to talk about more specifically, or just the whole record, basically? Just the whole. Yeah,
I just think because I feel like there's got to be an impetus on some level. And there's something to put you into the creative state, and that's what I'm curious about.
Yeah, what starts it? Actually, it's just a little voice. The voice goes, "It's time." And then I go, okay, it's time to write a record. And then I figure out what studio we're going to use and who I want to write it with. I love writing alone, but I live to collaborate. So Mike Farrell and I worked on this record together. And I called it the piano record the whole time because it was just us alone in a room with a piano and a mic. So, and then we fleshed it out with Alex Hope and Catherine Marks, both directing it. I call it directing. I really think the music business would benefit from that word, because sometimes producer makes sense, but I guess executive producer is what they call director. Anyway, credits. Well, yeah, there's a turning point where it's physical, like it's time to write. And if I don't write, I'm going to get sick. If I don't express myself, I'm going to get really depressed. So it's exciting and daunting when that turning point comes. If all were equal, I would love to put a record out every 2 years. But now it's exciting. This new climate, it's exciting and daunting. Is the idea of just kind of ongoingly putting out music. I remember 20 years ago, I was like, why don't we just put out a song whenever you feel like it? And people were like, oh, Alanis.
It doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work like
We've got
that.
decades and decades of doing it like this. It's just fine. Don't
upset any apple cart. Yeah. And then, but now it is. So the pro of it having been sort of one note before was it would be touring, falling down and recovering, and then writing another record again and rallying again and touring. So it was just this cycle. And there were times where I could, in theory, be under the rock and hide under there and generate stuff under there. Whereas now it's constant. So it's not every 4 years I'm doing something. There's a new song coming out next week. There's new songs and one-offs, for lack of a better term, that are happening now. So it's constant expression and constant generative, and all these other areas like animated shows. And, there's, speaking of mania, the ideas don't stop basically. So my whiteboard is full, and then I have an incredible team around me of people who are willing to work with me or collaborate with me. Some things like the musical taking 8 or 9 years, and other things taking an afternoon and recording it, so.
What's going on with the musical?
The musical is coming back post-pandemic. I don't know exactly the date, but it'll come back to Broadway. And then they're opening in Sydney. They're opening a Jagged Little Pill musical too.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I have to ask maybe like one of my favorites, or like old school. And I just have so many memories because I was in England at the very beginning of my stint there. And the album had just come out, and I remember that's all I played. But when Supposed Former Infatuation Junkie came out, I was like, oh my gosh, that one seems it's so deep. I'm curious what the impetus for that was. It's like, did you go to India and have an experience and meet some gurus? And I'm just so curious because, or just to me, it's like such a deep album.
Thank you. No, that one was really daunting to write because a lot of people were wanting me in some way, whether they knew it or not. They were asking me to repeat Jagged Little Pill, like make part 2, right? And also wherever I went, grocery stores, anywhere, the only question that was being posed to me is, when's your next record? When's your next record? And the more I heard that, the more I kind of wound tight, to be honest. And I remember going to Toronto to visit my friend Tim Thorney, and my intention was to start to write Supposed. And the studio was set up, beautiful candles. It was idyllic. And I turned to my friend Tim and I said, I don't want to do this. I don't want to write. I don't want to be here. And he was the first person who said, okay, well then let's not write. Let's go see a movie. And we went to a movie. We had a sandwich. And then when we got back, of course, I started writing because I just felt like I had the freedom to write or not write. And, I thank my friend Tim all the time for just providing that space and freedom to not write, So I had come back from India, and I had gone there to just sort of step away from everything and just be a brown-haired girl from Ottawa, Canada again, and I don't know if India itself, I mean, to me, it's one giant altar, everywhere. It just smells like an altar. Everything is prayerful there. And in Bali and certain places, and probably Egypt where you just were too, there's a sense of soulfulness and spirit that I wish we could sort of trickle around the whole planet sometimes. But when I came back from that, I remember feeling liberated somehow, just somehow the idea of going to India and letting go allowed me to just think, okay, well, what do you want to write? What do I want to write about? What do I care about right now? And it was almost like there was a fork in the road at that moment. Am I going to try and attempt to repeat, which I actually don't even think I could do. I think if I tried to repeat, I couldn't do it. Or am I going to just keep seeing what comes and writing what is happening, and I chose the latter, and I'm so happy I did.
Yeah. Well, do you think that it's, because I agree, the idea that it would be possible to just do another Jagged Little Pill album is might not even be possible. Is there something you think that you left behind with that album personally because it's like when we change, the things we see change, right? So like, you can't be that Alanis anymore. So what was it that changed from that point?
The turning point was, to the degree that ego was involved and service, it shifted because my ego scratched that itch and grabbed the brass ring and swallowed it, zeitgeist wise, and breaking records and all kinds of really heady sort of egoic things. And then I just thought, well, why would I keep going? Because a lot of this is not actually really enjoyable for me and my temperament. But I could see that people in the audience, people coming to the shows, were being given permission in a way, permission to be human, So I thought, well, if someone were to ask me what on my deathbed, like what was the most important thing, is just to be able to offer love in macrocosmic ways and in tiny microcosmic intimate ways, So I could see that through my career and through expressing myself, that everything I valued was being imbued into all of it. Whatever I wrote, whatever I performed, how I moved, it was all informed by this idea of just wanting to show up, and be of service and leave the room a little cleaner than how you found it.
That's a great gift. Do you feel that that's your purpose, or what do you feel your purpose is?
I think we're all unique filters, and we all have these quirky intelligences and abilities. And if we can hone in on who we are to that degree, what our talents are, what our capacities are, then we can work with those, and then this filter is contributing that. It's kind of like another way of saying what you said earlier, which is that if we know who we are in terms of our talents and our intelligences, then we can show up and use them. And then life's a little bit more jumping out of bed in the morning versus the daunting, no matter where we are, even if we kind of hate our job, is there a way for us to show up from this place of service, That just makes it all worth it to me. Because otherwise, I don't think being in the public eye is coolish. But I don't think I'd want to just stay in the public eye randomly for no reason. Yeah. And I think what's happened in the 70s and 60s, certainly ego was everywhere, but a lot of people were, wanting to be expressed. And that was part of what their fame story was. But now it's like fame in and of itself seems to be some kind of end. Like fame is the check mark. And I'm like, oh God, it's so hollow. It's so lonely, and I think it exacerbates anything that was going on before fame. So if there were any insecurities or hyper defensiveness or anything, if that was going on before fame, you can almost be assured that it'll triple as soon as fame comes into the picture.